Hi, I'm Karun Chandhok. I used to be a race instructor at the Silverstone Race School and very lucky to have raced there in various categories and been on the podium in F3 and GP2 and stuff. It's my adopted home circuit.
Karun, celebrating, quite a significant milestone in Silverstone's life with its 70th anniversary of Formula One being at the track. If you can, just remind us of the first time that you went to Silverstone.
The first time I went to Silverstone was 1995. My dad and I went to watch a round of the F3000 championship, actually. And yeah, that was the first time I remember standing at Copse Corner and watching the cars there. And it was brilliant. You know, I was 11 years old, had come over from India and, we'd come over during my school summer holidays. And I remember coming here, and I had no interest in all the other touristy stuff my parents wanted to take us to, and Warwick Castle and Windsor Castle and all this stuff. All I was waiting for was that weekend to go to Silverstone.
Did you grow up back in India having watched the British Grand Prix and other Grand Prix on television?
So interestingly, we'd never had Formula One on TV until '93. The first Grand Prix that was telecast live was a Spanish Grand Prix in '93. In fact, I still remember watching it. And but we had friends of ours here in the UK who would record races on VHS tapes and send it in the post. And back then, the post would take something like 2 months to get to us. So the first race I ever watched was the '87 British Grand Prix, but I probably watched it in, I don't know, Christmas or at Christmas time or something like that. But yeah, so there's a friend of ours called Martin Stone who ended up being involved with various race teams down the line. And so he was very good about recording the races and sending the tapes to us.
That's amazing. I mean, your love affair with motorsport, motor racing, cars, Formula One, it is very clear. So what was it like that first time that you got into, I don't know what it was, but you managed to drive at Silverstone?
I think the first time I drove at Silverstone was in Formula 3. I came across from India and moved here to Brackley, which is obviously just down the road from Silverstone, in 2002, and was competing in British Formula 3 at the time. It was fantastic. Look, for a kid growing up in India, Silverstone, even being in the pit lane at Silverstone, let alone getting a chance to drive around the Grand Prix circuit, was, felt so far away. It felt unattainable almost, and it was very special. And then so I remember in the middle of that year, Andy Prio, who obviously was racing touring cars and became world champion a few times, he said to me, he says, "Look, why don't you get a job at the Silverstone Race School?" And because I needed a bit of income I had the sponsorship backing and some family support for the racing side, but I needed to to earn a living at home. So he got me a job, or he got me an interview essentially with the race school, and I went and I had a brilliant time. I spent 3 years working at the race school there, doing everything really. There were days where I remember standing in a marshal's post in wellies and waving the yellow flag of the school circuit. And then there were other days where, I was driving the recovery vehicle parked on the inside of Copse Corner for the bike track days. And every time somebody fell off, I had to drive the van out and go sort of, we'd pick the guy up, the rider, put him in the stretcher in the ambulance, send him off. Then I'd be there picking his bike up, chucking all the bits in. And as he got in the ambulance, we'd sort of shout at him, what garage are you in? And he'll shout 5C or something. And, I'd just go and dump all his pile of bits in the garage and then park up the van again on the inside of Copse, and away we go. So yeah, no, I have great memories of Silverstone, and of course to go from there to then one day competing in the British Grand Prix myself was it was very special. And the fact I lived in Brackley, so close from there, so I have friends even now who live in Silverstone Village and around the area. So yeah, it's very much my adopted home race.
Does the whole place feel very different on a race weekend with Brackley, Silverstone Village, as you say? Does it kind of change at all?
Yeah, yeah, it transforms completely. You suddenly get loads of Londoners showing up, and people from around the world, really. But it does change. But there's a buzz about it. I think the locals are take pride in the fact that it becomes a destination for Formula One fans all around the world. I know, like my local Indian restaurant, who's ended up naming dishes after me because he was a bit of a fan. Um, you know, he's symptomatic of the feeling across the town where they know this is a good weekend for them. It's good business. It's good for local economy. The pubs are full. There's a buzz about the place.
I have eaten in said India, and I have eaten one of your dishes. It's delicious.
Very good. It didn't bite you too badly then.
No, it was a very surreal night, but it was good. um, just thinking about how you started, really, because you say that it wasn't on TV back at home. You had, VHS cassettes sent to you. How did you start wanting to become a driver and get involved with wanting to be a Formula One driver?
Well, my family were in the sport. My dad used to race. My grandfather used to race. My grandmother raced in the early '70s herself. So, yeah, I guess family business is a big thing in India, and I guess this is ours. But none of them had the opportunity to race, obviously, at a high level or race internationally. I was the first one who was able to really leave the subcontinent and make an international career out of it. I grew up, yeah. So I grew up around the racetrack and rallying. My dad used to rally and ran a rally team. We had 8 cars at one point, so it was quite a big operation. And I used to spend the weekends traveling around the country to him to different events. So I just grew up in that environment, and the bug bit. But I think people underestimate sometimes how far we were in terms of being able to reach the sport and touch the sport, because we had no go-karting tracks, for example. There wasn't a kart track, and therefore I've never done a kart race in my life, and that's a huge disadvantage. When you think of a kid like Lewis, who even before they've gotten into their first car, which in his case I guess was Formula Renault, they've already had 10 or 12 years of karting where they've got the feel of new tires and grip, and at that formative age where kids are growing up, they develop that muscle memory of driving. And that's something where, I think not karting was certainly a disadvantage.
When you made the move to come across to India with your family, did you ever think, hang on a minute, this is strange, because clearly there isn't a huge range of diversity within motorsport. So all of a sudden to come over from India, did you look around and think, why am I the only person that's got brown skin around here?
I think, to me at the time, I felt very proud of being the only Indian driver on the grid, actually. There was, you have to remember, when I came over, it was, I still remember, it was the 1st of February 2002. And at that stage, Narain was racing, I think, the World Series by Nissan. India hadn't yet had a Formula One driver. And really, there were only the 2 of us. We had 1.2 billion people, and there were only 2 of us on the ladder, even climbing the ladder. And when we're sitting here now, what are we, nearly 18 years later, and there's still only been 2 of us who've raced in Formula One or tested even in Formula One. So, because of that, there was a great deal of expectation and pressure from people back home. There was a lot of media hype around it. So I actually almost embraced the opportunity of being this flag bearer for Indian motorsport. I quite liked the idea of being something different on the grid, or being somebody different. Of course, I was aware that I was different. You only had to look around the driver's briefing, and you suddenly realize, I think there was one Thai driver on the grid, and Honda always had 1 or 2 Japanese drivers, but the rest were, predominantly white white male drivers around me. I had Catherine Legg racing with us in F3 for, I think she did only 3 or 4 races, and they ran out of budget. But yeah, otherwise it was just mainly white guys. So yeah, the fact didn't escape me, but I have to say my personal experience, and I know I've seen from some of Lewis's Instagram posts and things like that, that he talks about having some issues when he was younger in karting, especially. And I can't obviously speak about that. I can't relate to that because I wasn't a black kid growing up at the go-kart tracks here in the 90s. My experience was at a higher level already when I came in Formula 3. And I have to say that I never felt like drivers treated me differently. I never felt engineers or mechanics or officials or anybody treated me differently because of where I was from or the color of my skin. In fact, people almost were more curious to know, like, how on earth have you ended up here? And I remember when you're racing in Formula 3, you're using the cheapest of the cheap B&Bs, and we never had the budget to do it properly. You'd have Nelson Piquet there in his super duper motorhome, staying at the Hilton 5-star whatever, and I'd be at the Royal Hotel Lodge in Thetford at £35 a night. And but I remember walking in the bar, like the people just couldn't comprehend. Wait, you come from India? You're driving race cars, and you're in Thetford? Like, I don't understand what's going on. They almost seemed this degree of confusion about them, which was interesting.
That's brilliant. I love that. The airs and graces of working in motorsport and trying to be a driver. What about paddock life? Has that ever been a strange place to be? Because I certainly know when I walk into a paddock, predominantly it is white, middle to upper class men, and it's their world.
I think when I walk into the paddock, you certainly look around you and you say it's probably 95 or 97% white. And it's probably, I don't know, 85, 88% male. I think is the fact. You can't. That's not a theory. That's not. I'm not even saying it as a criticism or whatever. It's just fact, right? But for me, I think I'm in a slightly different position because I've been fortunate to have been in race paddocks and in the Formula One paddock ever since I was a teenager. So I've never felt, personally, I've never felt uncomfortable. But that's actually, perhaps a slightly skewed view. Well, it is a skewed view because I've had friends of mine come to races, or other people from India come to races, and they've immediately picked up on the fact and gone, hang on a second, there really are no brown people here. And, it does make me think about that a little bit more. But again, go to my earlier point, I think if I divided it up and say at the core of the sport, and when I say the core, I mean the people who work in that traveling circus, i.e. the teams, the media, the drivers, the FIA, the Formula One people, I've never been treated differently by anyone in the paddock. I've always felt that any drives I've got, not just in the F1, ladder, but even in Le Mans, places like that, any drives I've got is been because of my ability to drive. I've been respected as a pundit or a commentator because of my knowledge. And, I think that's, so I personally have felt that from the core of the sport, but certainly on the periphery of the sport. I remember going to a race, and I won't mention where, but was when I was working with Channel 4. And I said to Eddie Jordan that I said, in this particular country, the racism is quite a problem. And I said, you watch whichever, we had a convoy of 4 cars, I think, we were getting the circuit, to and from the circuit. And I said to Eddie, I said, you watch whichever car I'm in, that's the one where the bags will get searched. And sure enough, it happened on day 1, on Thursday. And then on day 2, to prove it wasn't a coincidence, I changed cars. And again, it happened. And then on day 3, again, I changed cars and again it happened. And on Sunday, it was ridiculous because I remember we pulled up and basically the security guard stuck his head in and literally said, there was 5 of us in this car, and basically looked at me and said, "Which one is your bag?" And he was only interested in searching my bag. And I think, it's something that the other people, obviously, who worked with me at the time, it's the first time that they noticed it, that there is a difference, because they don't even think about it, right? You rock up the paddock, and I'm sure you're the same. You just walk in the paddock, you take security ground, you walk through. Um, Whereas I automatically build in an extra minute or two because I know there'll be a longer process to go in. And it's obviously not right. And it's obviously but these aren't um, Formula One issues, right? These are systemic issues in those particular countries. There've been unfortunate instances where, I've been, as we do in this job, we travel around the world. We travel to, some fantastic countries around the world. And there have been instances where I've been refused a table, for example, at a restaurant, despite the restaurant being empty. And on this particular occasion, you know, um, Crofty and Simon Lazenby were about 2 minutes behind me, and I said to them, I said, "Yeah, this guy's just told me that he can't give me a table because he's full." And Crofty, in true Crofty fashion, stomped up to him and went, "He's with us. We're going in, and there's a table." And we just barged straight in. And and to be honest, I appreciate the fact that the people I work with, people like Crofty and Simon and stuff, they do make an effort to make sure that I'm protected. And the same things happened in the past. I remember in F3, we were at a hotel near Castle Coombe, and somebody had obviously had one too many and started getting a bit lippy at the bar with me. And immediately the mechanics and the people that I worked with on the team, they just, stood up, dealt with the guy, made sure, and just sort of put him in his place. Not physically, but I'm saying, just told him off and put him in his place. And, that's what I'm saying. I think I'm fortunate that I think at the core of the sport, people don't see, people don't treat you differently, nowadays. But also, I think sharing these stories, and the reason I'm happy to share these stories and tell these stories, is I think it's making people, particularly white people in the paddock, think, hang on a second, maybe we have to do this preemptively. Maybe we have to make a preemptive move to make sure that the non-white people are felt included and are felt protected a bit more.
And when it comes to Lewis Hamilton and what he's trying to achieve at the moment, and the fact that all of the drivers have come together, they all spoke out through the GPDA and said, look, we all believe that racism needs to end, and we are all behind that. They've all worn the t-shirts. How important do you think Lewis's involvement in that is to make sure that we do address the diversity issue that is so clearly prominent in motorsport?
Of course, Lewis is the most important voice in this campaign because he's the one with first-hand experience of it. He's the one who's spoken very openly and eloquently about issues that he's faced and his friends and his family have faced in the past. And none of the other drivers can say that. So, he's very much the key player in terms of educating people and explaining to people what some of the issues are. But he's not the one who's going to solve the issues of diversity and inclusion in the sport. And I think also we have to be very clear here. It's not just about racism. It's not just about race. We're talking about gender. We're talking about sexual orientation. We're talking about socioeconomic. I think that's a really important factor that's often not talked about or overlooked. We're talking about personalities. Typically in our sport, introverts aren't heard. If you're an extrovert, then you've got a voice in the paddock, and you've got a voice at the table, but the introverts aren't heard, and we have to think about, hang on, are we giving them a chance to share their views and opinions, and whether they're engineers in a team or whoever. So I think there's there's various aspects that need to be discussed and dealt with, and that's part of Formula One's plan. Is it's not purely about race; it's about the wider subject.
And obviously, the very first race, we saw, it seemed like quite an organised display, that Formula One, FOM, the FIA, everybody was kind of on board with, okay, it didn't matter whether you took a knee or whether you just wore a t-shirt, what you were comfortable with as a driver. And that doesn't kind of seem to have worked as we've gone further along the process, and each race has been a little bit more disorganized or a little bit more uncomfortable to watch. Do you think it is important that the drivers have a platform, however they want to express that they want to end races, and they have to have a platform to do it?
I think we have to be careful that the conversation needs to move beyond symbolism and signs and talking about it to actually actively doing something about it. And if I look at the last 10 days, 2 weeks, the majority of conversations have been dominated by which drivers did or didn't take the knee, and why they did it, and are they going to do it in the future, etc. Whereas I think we need to, yes, of course, listen, don't get me wrong, it's a powerful sign, it's a powerful symbol of support. And I think what was done on the opening day of the test match, for example, the England-West Indies test match, I watched it, and it took, for that minute there, especially having heard Michael Holding speak just before that, and then watch the players and the non-playing members of both teams around the boundary lines. It was a really powerful image, and it does stop you in your tracks and make you think about the subject and what they're trying to make us more conscious of. But in Formula One now, I think it's important to move the conversation a bit onto what is actually being done. What are the actual tangible plans in place? Lewis has announced obviously the Hamilton Commission, and now the next steps are going to be, okay, he's got, this is the framework of it. Let's now understand his plan. What are the active steps he's doing? And the same with Formula One. Chase Carey's made a very powerful statement by putting his money where his mouth is, and donating personally to the cause, which is a tremendous commitment, really, from somebody right at the top of our sport. And I know from private conversations I've had with Formula One that they've got a very interesting roadmap. They've got various pillars where they're looking to activate and put in place programs, because this isn't an issue that we're going to fix in the next week, 2 weeks, 1 year, 2 years even. But what we want is, let's say, when our kids grow up and they are in their 20s, and they want to work in Formula One, that at that point, there are more women and there are more non-white people in the sport. I think that we have to be, we have to be realistic. The ambition has to be a long-term ambition. This is a 10-year, 20-year, maybe even generational change, right? And so I think, there was a load of tweets from people saying, oh, you guys are talking about, the diversity topic too much, and well, nothing's happened. And it's like, well, nothing. What do you expect is going to happen in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time? If you've got to make a long-term plan, it's going to take a while to put in place. But what I'm trying to say here is to move beyond the symbolism of it. I think the conversation from the media and from the sport and the drivers need to be understanding what they can do as individuals. What can you as an individual driver um, do to, I don't know, when you're next going to hire a physio, do you look outside the norm, which is a white male physio? I think it's interesting when you look at the grid now. Lewis is the only one, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Lewis is the only one whose physio isn't a white male.
Yeah.
He's obviously got Angela working with him, and I think obviously Mark Webber had Roger with him a few years ago. But apart from that, you don't see it, and so there's just small aspects, but it has to be done in a structured way. It has to be done in a methodical way, because you've also got to be careful not to make people who, let's say the physios who are there at the moment, you don't want them to lose their job because somebody has hired another person, a female physio or a non-white physio, purely as a token gesture. It has to be meritocratic, because otherwise that person who's coming in will always have that stigma of being there as a token, which is wrong, and I think so. It's a complex issue, right? It's a complex issue in terms of the hiring for teams as well. And they know this, and therefore they all know it's not an issue that you're going to resolve in a week or a couple of months.
And it's fascinating. I mean, if you look at the path of what Susie Wolff is trying to achieve when she had Dare to Be Different, it's now, the FIA's Girls on Track initiative. These are all longer missions, I suppose, because as you say, you can't just turn things around overnight. But do you see that there are things that fans can do, things that people listening to this podcast could do to make a difference, to try and change what they do?
Well, I think it's been really interesting, hasn't it, the last couple of months, because I thought about it myself. I was like, the tragedy with George Floyd clearly made waves across the planet, much more than I think we've seen since probably the Rodney King tragedy, which was a long while ago, really now. And, I did wonder, I said, okay, this isn't a new problem that's in America. It is a serious problem, but it's not a new problem. But it certainly made me, and then when Lewis started, I'll put my hand up and say, absolutely, Lewis was a catalyst to me educating myself on the topic. When he started posting about it and being so outspoken and vocal about it, it made me stop and think about my own personal experiences in life and in the sport and the paddock, and things that I just brushed aside and, been opaque to, really. And then I think, being in lockdown again, my wife and I were able to spend time. We both jointly, because again, through her work, at a corporate company, there's a real movement for people to understand in corporate life, what needs to change as well. So you start reading articles about it, you start understanding things about it. And, it was interesting just sharing Instagram posts with friends of mine. You often hear people, particularly white male people, saying, I'm not racist, I am friends with XYZ, who's a black person, and therefore, I can't be racist. Or they'll say things like, when you're saying things like all lives matter, why is it that the Black Lives Matter movement is the one that needs to be talked about more right now? And it, it's just understanding why certain terminology is important, and the key words are important, and the way that we speak and what we're saying, even though our intentions might be different, actually the words we're using are important, and picking those words are really important. And I've shared various articles and links with friends of mine who work within F1 who've all I looked at an Instagram post even yesterday, and I looked at it and thought, oh, these are things that I say, and those explanations as to why actually it undermines the issues and the struggles that people from BAME communities have had, and it made me think about it. In just the next time that I discuss the topic of racism or diversity, just choosing your words, and I think that's important for society on the whole, just to understand it, and it doesn't take long. I think the problem is people are afraid to talk about it. The issues. People are um, typically afraid of saying the wrong thing, and therefore they think, okay, the easiest thing to do is just not say anything, which is exactly Lewis's point. Lewis is calling for people to say, he's saying to people, it's not enough to be non-racist and say I'm not racist. What he's asking for is for people to be actively anti-racist and to educate just your neighbors, your couple of your family members. Just educate people. Understand first yourself, and then educate a couple of people around you on really what the sensitivities are with the words that you use and the tone that you use and the language you use, and also, most importantly, at the core of it, understanding why um, you know certain words are hurtful to people from those communities. That's the core issue, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Karun, I want to thank you for your time, for your honesty, and also for trying to, I suppose, as you say, to educate people like myself, like anybody who wants to go out there and try and be better.
Well, listen, nobody's perfect, right? None of us on this planet, and I think nobody will ever be perfect. But that's the important thing, is to recognize that. We all have a lot to learn, and I certainly have found the last 2 months really educational in ways that I didn't expect to be. Just as I said, I think especially when you're a racing driver or now working in television, you get so focused sometimes on your job when you walk into the paddock. You've got your driver head on. You're focusing on what you need to do to make the car faster and what you need to do to drive faster. And when you're working in TV, all you're trying to do is soak up knowledge about the racing. But I think it's really important, especially for people who have a voice and have a platform, and people in the media do. People like the drivers and team bosses do. They've all got social media platforms and their own fan followings in their own countries. And I strongly believe it's important for them to use that voice for good. And I think, my mum always used to say, being a racing driver shouldn't just be about going around and around in circles. It's got to be you got to do something for the greater good of the planet. And it's I think that's something that the sport on the whole can benefit from.
Thank you.